People ask me all the time when I'm moving back to America. Sometimes it's family, sometimes it's friends, sometimes it's complete strangers who somehow discover I'm American about 30 seconds after I open my mouth. They'll smile and ask, "So, when are you moving home?" And every time, I pause just a little longer than they expect, because the answer surprises almost everyone. I don't think I'm moving back, at least not permanently. What's funny is that people immediately start guessing why. They assume it's politics. Or maybe they think I've fallen hopelessly in love with rainy weather and overpriced grocery stores. Trust me, after paying London rent for a flat that's approximately the size of my childhood garage, I'm definitely not here because it's cheaper. The real reason is something much quieter than that. Living in Britain changed the way I see everyday life, and once that shift happened, it became impossible to unsee. Now, before anyone starts typing an angry comment, this isn't an anti-America video. America is where I grew up. It's where I learned who I was. It's where my family still lives, where some of my favorite memories were made, and where I still love going back to visit. If someone asked me to list all the things America does brilliantly, I'd probably be here for an hour. This country gave the world incredible innovation, unbelievable natural beauty, ambitious people who dream ridiculously big, and a kind of optimism that's genuinely contagious. I didn't leave because I hated America. In fact, I left thinking I'd only be gone for a little while. London was supposed to be an adventure, not a permanent address. But somewhere over the past 2 years, something changed. Actually, that's not quite true. It wasn't one thing. It was hundreds of tiny things that slowly rearranged how I thought life was supposed to feel. Growing up in America, I never questioned most of the routines around me because, well, why would I? When you're born into a culture, it becomes your operating system. You don't wake up every morning wondering why traffic lights are red instead of purple. They're just red. In the same way, I never questioned the pace we lived at, the things we worried about, or the little calculations everyone made without even realizing it. Those habits were invisible because they were normal. Then I moved thousands of miles away, and suddenly it felt like someone had adjusted the lighting in a room I'd lived in my whole life. Nothing inside the room had changed. I could just finally see it clearly. One of the first things I noticed in Britain was how ordinary everything felt. That sounds strange because you'd expect moving to another country to feel dramatically different every day. Instead, life became surprisingly boring, and I mean that as the highest compliment. My mornings involved walking to the tube, grabbing coffee, squeezing into a train with people pretending not to notice each other, working remotely from my tiny flat, and occasionally arguing with my radiator like it was a stubborn roommate. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't cinematic, it was just life. But somewhere inside that ordinary routine was a feeling I couldn't quite identify. I felt lighter. At first, I assumed it was just the excitement of living abroad. Surely the novelty would wear off. Instead, the opposite happened. The novelty faded, but the feeling stayed. If you're enjoying this video so far, then do hit the like and subscribe so that YouTube could recommend you our future videos. Then I flew back to America for a visit. I was excited before the plane even landed. I missed my family, I missed proper Mexican food, and yes, I even missed those enormous American grocery stores where you can accidentally buy enough cereal to survive a small apocalypse. But something unexpected happened during that trip. I started noticing little habits I'd never questioned before. Friends casually talked about health insurance plans over dinner. People apologized for not taking vacation because work was too busy. News stories that would have barely caught my attention a few years earlier suddenly felt unusually heavy. It was like visiting the house you grew up in after years away. Everything looked the same, but you somehow noticed details you'd ignored your entire childhood. That trip planted a question in my mind that refused to leave. Was Britain actually better? Honestly, I don't think that's even the right question. Every country has strengths. Every country has frustrations. Britain certainly isn't perfect. I've had enough train delays to write an entire documentary called Cancelled Due to Leaves on the Track. I've learned that British weather forecasts are more like optimistic suggestions than reliable predictions. And if you've ever tried finding decent air conditioning during one of those rare London heat waves, you'll understand why everyone suddenly treats a desk fan like it's a priceless family heirloom. Living here hasn't made me blind to the country's flaws. What it has done is force me to compare two different ways of organizing everyday life. That comparison became fascinating because I realized I wasn't actually comparing governments or economies. I was comparing feelings. How stressed do people seem? How much time do they spend with family? What worries quietly sit in the background of everyday conversations? Which problems have become so familiar that nobody even notices them anymore? Those questions mattered far more than I expected. There was one realization that changed everything for me, but I'm going to save that until later because it took me almost 2 years to understand it myself before I could explain why I wasn't moving back. I first had to understand why living here felt different in ways I couldn't immediately describe. The biggest surprise wasn't architecture or accents or even driving on the left. It was discovering that peace of mind isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it arrives so quietly that you only recognize it after it's already become part of your routine. And oddly enough, the first place I truly noticed that wasn't while walking through London or visiting famous landmarks. It happened because I caught a nasty chest infection during my first winter. Here, nothing life-threatening, just one of those illnesses that makes you feel like you've been hit by a bus driven by someone who actively dislikes you. I remember lying in my flat feeling absolutely miserable, and for a split second, my brain reacted exactly the way it had been trained to back home. Before I even thought about how sick I felt, another question popped into my head. How much is this going to cost? That single thought lasted only a moment before I realized something remarkable. Here in Britain, that wasn't actually the first question I needed to answer. If this video has surprised you even once, type this video so that more people could get the recommendation of this video. That realization caught me completely off guard. My first instinct had been shaped by years of growing up in America, where healthcare and money are often tangled together in a way that becomes second nature. You don't even realize you're making the calculation. You wonder whether something is serious enough to justify the bill, whether your insurance covers it, whether the clinic you're about to visit is in your network, and whether you'll regret the decision later. Millions of Americans navigate that system every day, and many do it successfully. But once I experienced a different approach, I noticed something I had never paid attention to. Before, I wasn't just less worried about getting treatment, I was spending less mental energy worrying about the possibility of needing treatment in the first place. That doesn't mean the British system is perfect. Anyone who lives here long enough will happily tell you about long waiting lists, overstretched hospitals, and the occasional challenge of getting a GP appointment. I've had conversations with British friends where they complain about the NHS with the same passion Americans reserve for airline delays. But here's what fascinated me. The complaints were usually about speed, not affordability. The conversation started with, "It took me weeks to get an appointment," rather than, "Can I afford to see a doctor?" That's a completely different starting point. According to international comparisons from the Commonwealth Fund and the OECD, the UK spends significantly less per person on healthcare than the United States while still providing universal access. Those statistics are interesting, but what mattered to me wasn't the chart. It was how those policies quietly shaped everyday decisions. I realized healthcare isn't just about hospitals, it's about freedom. Not the loud, dramatic kind of freedom people argue about online, but the quiet kind that shows up on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. It's the freedom to see a doctor without wondering if you're about to make an expensive mistake. It's the freedom to change jobs without healthcare becoming the deciding factor. It's the freedom to recover when you're sick, instead of calculating the financial consequences before you've even checked your temperature. I never thought peace of mind could come from something as boring as administrative systems, but apparently it can. That was the first major shift in how I thought about daily life, and it opened the door to noticing something else that had been invisible to me for years. The next realization was much harder to talk about because it's emotional before it's statistical. Growing up in America, there were little habits that everyone around me shared without discussing them. You automatically noticed emergency exits in public buildings. Schools practiced lockdown drills. Certain news alerts carried a particular kind of dread before you even opened them. None of this felt unusual because it was simply part of growing up. Human beings are incredibly adaptable. If something happens around you often enough, your brain files it away as normal, even when it really isn't. I didn't recognize that adaptation until I lived somewhere else. One afternoon in London, I was sitting in a cafe working on my laptop when I suddenly realized I hadn't thought about personal safety all day. Not because Britain is some magical place where crime doesn't exist. It absolutely does. But because a specific background thought had quietly disappeared. I hadn't consciously noticed it leaving. It was more like the moment your refrigerator stops humming and only then do you realize it had been making noise the entire time. That was an incredibly strange feeling because you can't miss something you never knew was there until it's gone. When I started looking into the numbers, they explained why my emotional reaction felt so different. Research from Johns Hopkins and other public health organizations consistently shows that the United States experiences firearm death rates far higher than other high-income countries, And school shootings are extraordinarily rare in Britain compared with America. Those are deeply uncomfortable statistics, and I don't bring them up to score political points. They're simply part of understanding how different societies evolve. Every country makes choices through laws, history, culture, and public expectations that shape everyday life. Those choices have consequences. Whether people agree with them or not, the surprising part wasn't reading the statistics. It was realizing how completely I had normalized them while growing up. When you hear about something frequently enough, your brain develops emotional calluses. That's probably a survival mechanism. You can't live in a constant state of fear. Eventually, your mind protects itself by treating extraordinary events as ordinary background noise. Moving abroad peeled away those layers of familiarity. Suddenly, stories that once blended into the daily news cycle hit me differently because I no longer lived inside the environment that had trained me to accept them. I noticed it most clearly whenever I flew back to visit family. I'd hear conversations about which neighborhoods people avoided, or parents discussing school safety in ways that sounded perfectly reasonable to everyone around them. Nobody was being dramatic. Nobody was panicking. They were simply adapting to the reality they knew. Then I'd catch myself thinking, wait, this conversation feels different now. Not because America had changed during the few months I'd been away, but because I had. Living in Britain hadn't made me fearless. It had simply removed one layer of background anxiety that I never realized I been carrying. It wasn't that Britain felt perfectly safe. It was that a certain kind of invisible mental weight had quietly disappeared. Around the same time, another difference started sneaking into my life. And honestly, I almost resisted it at first. Work. Americans have a fascinating relationship with work because we often wear busyness like it's an Olympic medal. Ask someone how they're doing, and there's a decent chance they'll proudly answer, busy, as though exhaustion itself proves you're succeeding. I was exactly like that. My schedule was packed, my inbox never slept. And somewhere along the way, I'd convinced myself that constantly being productive meant I was building a meaningful life. Then I moved to Britain, where colleagues would casually mention taking 2 weeks off, sometimes 3, and nobody looked at them like they'd committed a crime against capitalism. My first reaction was almost suspicious. I remember thinking, are you allowed to do that? It felt strangely rebellious to actually use vacation days instead of saving them for some imaginary emergency that never arrived. According to OECD comparisons, workers in most European countries, including the UK, receive substantially more guaranteed paid annual leave than the average American worker. Add statutory sick leave into the conversation, and you begin to see a different philosophy emerging. Work still matters here. People still work hard, but there's a stronger expectation that life exists outside your job. It took me months to stop feeling guilty every time I wasn't working. I'd take a walk through one of London's parks on a weekday afternoon and instinctively feel like I should be answering emails instead. Then I look around and see parents with children, retirees feeding ducks, office workers eating lunch on a bench, and tourists getting hopelessly lost despite holding a map the size of a bedsheet. Slowly, my definition of productivity started changing. I stopped measuring success by how exhausted I was, and that shift turned out to affect almost every other part of my life. It also made me curious about something I hadn't expected. If all of these little differences, healthcare, safety, vacation time, were affecting how people lived day to day, could they actually add up to something measurable? I started reading reports the way some people binge true crime documentaries. One statistic in particular completely stopped me in my tracks. And it wasn't the healthcare one I'd mentioned earlier. It was life expectancy. On average, people in the UK live longer than people in the United States. That gap isn't explained by one dramatic cause. It's the result of thousands of tiny influences layered on top of each other over decades. Access to healthcare, diet, road safety, smoking rates, violence, social support, working conditions, preventative medicine. None of these tells the whole story on its own. Together, though, they paint a picture of how a society functions. I found that strangely comforting because it reminded me that quality of life is rarely determined by one spectacular decision. We love stories about life-changing moments, but real life usually isn't like that. It's more like erosion. Tiny drops of water slowly reshape an entire landscape. The same is true for societies. Tiny systems quietly shape millions of ordinary days until years later, those ordinary days become extraordinary outcomes. Life expectancy isn't just about how long people live. It's a reflection of how those years are lived. That realization completely reframed the way I looked at public policy. Instead of asking whether one country was winning or losing, I started asking a different question. Which systems make everyday life just a little bit easier, a little bit safer, or a little bit healthier? That curiosity led me to another statistic that was equally difficult to ignore. The United States has one of the highest incarceration rates in the world. Again, This isn't about blaming one political party or pretending the issue is simple. Criminal justice is incredibly complicated, shaped by decades of legislation, economics, policing, education, addiction, poverty, and countless other factors. But standing outside your own country gives you permission to notice patterns that once blended into the background. It made me wonder how different societies respond when people fail, make mistakes, or fall through the cracks. Those questions don't have easy answers, but they're worth asking because they reveal what a country believes about punishment, rehabilitation, responsibility, and opportunity. Living in Britain also introduced me to something that's surprisingly hard to measure: social trust. It's one of those invisible forces you barely notice until it's missing. You see it in little moments: people lining up without barriers, telling them where to stand, children taking public transport, neighbors apologizing when you accidentally bump into them, even when it was clearly your fault. Of course, Britain has crime, disagreements, and political divisions just like everywhere else. But there was a subtle feeling that many public spaces were designed around the assumption that people would generally cooperate rather than compete. I didn't appreciate how much that atmosphere affected my mood until I experienced it every day. Now, before anyone from Britain gets too excited, let me balance this out, because every place has its trade-offs. British bureaucracy can test the patience of a saint. Renting in London sometimes feels like competing in a reality show, where the prize is a flat with windows that almost close properly. Customer service occasionally gives the impression that enthusiasm is somehow against company policy. And don't even get me started on trying to buy peanut butter that doesn't. Taste slightly confused. America still does plenty of things better: the energy, the entrepreneurship, the friendliness of strangers, the breathtaking variety of landscapes, and the belief that almost anything is possible. Those qualities are real, and I genuinely miss them. That's why I think people often ask the wrong question. They ask, which country is better? But that's like asking whether hiking boots are better than running shoes. Better for what? Better for whom? The answer depends entirely on what you're trying to do. Every country is making trade-offs. America accepts certain problems because it prioritizes certain freedoms and opportunities. Britain accepts different frustrations because it prioritizes different outcomes. Neither system is perfect because perfection doesn't exist. Eventually, everyone decides which compromises they're personally willing to live with. Once I understood that, the conversation became much less about patriotism and much more about values. There was one evening that made everything click for me. I was walking home across London just after sunset. The streets weren't empty, but they weren't crowded either. People were carrying groceries, chatting outside cafes, walking their dogs, or simply heading home after work. Nothing remarkable was happening. No famous landmark suddenly appeared in front of me. No orchestra started playing in the background. It was one of the most ordinary evenings imaginable. Yet I remember stopping for a moment and realizing I felt completely settled. Not excited, not amazed, just settled. And that's when the realization I'd been hinting at finally arrived. The biggest reason I don't want to move back isn't healthcare or vacation days or any individual statistic. Those things matter, but they're not the heart of the story. The real reason is that Britain quietly changed my definition of success. Growing up, I thought success meant earning more, doing more, achieving more, staying busy, and always chasing the next opportunity. None of those goals are bad. In fact, they helped shape who I am. But somewhere over the last 2 years, another definition started replacing the old one. Success became sleeping well, having time to call my family without watching the clock, taking a walk because I wanted to, not because my smartwatch politely informed me I hadn't moved in 6 hours, feeling like work supported my life instead of my life supporting my work. I discovered that peace isn't the absence of ambition. It's the ability to enjoy what you've already built. If you enjoyed spending this time with me, don't forget to like and subscribe for more honest stories about life in London. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.